Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing special guest Josh Bernoff. Based in Portland, Josh is former Senior Vice President Idea Development at Forrester and is a business book expert whose collaborative book projects have generated more than $20 million for their authors. Josh is the author of a number of books, including Writing Without Bullshit, Boost Your Career by Saying What You Mean, and most recently, Build a Better Business Book, How to Plan, Write, and Promote a Book That Matters. You can follow him if you want to on X at jbernoff, and check out his website at bernoff.com and his blog at bernoff.com/blog, as well as his LinkedIn newsletter, Insights for Writers Who Care. Josh is the author of the recently released report, Business Book ROI Study. In their comprehensive study, Josh and the team conducted the largest ever survey of published business authors, asking authors about both material and non-material rewards for their book writing work, resulting in the clearest ever picture of the modern publishing landscape. In this interview, we're going to talk a little bit about Josh's background and career, the Business Book ROI Study and its sponsors, and at the end, we'll discuss some of the present trends and controversies in the world of book publishing. So thank you very much, Josh, for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Thanks for that great introduction. I'm looking forward to it.
I always like to start these interviews by asking the guest for their origin story. You've had a varied career. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about where you grew up and your path to being a business book expert.
Sure. This is sort of an interesting origin story, at least I hope so. When I was growing up, I was good at two things. I was really good at writing and I was really good at math. And of course, everyone said, there's lots of writers in the world, but there's not that many people who are really good at math. So you should go into math. And so I majored in math at Penn State, finished in 3 years, and then went into the PhD program in mathematics at MIT. And 3 years into that, I thought to myself, gosh, if I really do well at this, there'll be 11 people in the world who can understand what I'm working on. So I left that program and spent 14 years in what at the time was sort of the hotbed of innovation, which was the software business. And then following that, I ended up spending 20 years as an analyst at Forrester Research. So my job was to analyze the media industry, and I did pretty well as an analyst. But about halfway into that gig, I went to the CEO and said, listen, this has been really great, but I really want to write a book, because I had decided that going back to the writing was important. And if I didn't write a book by the time I was 50, who was I kidding? Now, to his credit, the CEO, George Colony, said, why don't you write a book for us? I thought, well, this could be even better. I could actually get paid while I was writing the book. So working with another analyst, Charlene Lee, we wrote the book Groundswell that you can see over my shoulder here. Got published by Harvard Business Press, sold 150,000 copies, and made both Charlene and me pretty well known in terms of our analysis of social media. And we went in different directions. Charlene built a whole business based on her social media knowledge and insight. And I decided that books were my thing. So I worked on 4 other books while I was at Forrester, edited 2 and co-authored 2 other ones. And then I left, and for the last 15 years, I've been working with authors, because books and publishing is what interests me most. And I've worked on more than 50 book projects, all nonfiction, all or nearly all business books, and basically trying to get my arms around some of the most interesting ideas and authors that are out there and help them to be successful.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic story. I believe one of the things you worked. I mean, I'm just sort of curious to talk about a little bit about what it's like working for a company like Forrester. From the outside, it just sounds like you get to work on cool research projects all the time and write interesting reports about cutting edge things. Is that I mean, I know, for example, you worked on TV, I believe, at one point, and the future of TV and stuff like that. It just sounds fascinating. Is that what it's like? Do people tap you on the shoulder and say, cool thing over here, go learn about it?
Well, you're under constant pressure to publish research that answers questions that nobody knows the answer to. So no one has an interest in paying for and reading research about things that are well known, which means you need to answer questions that nobody knows. For example, when I started there, the first report I worked on answered the question, what will pay for content online, which in 1995, no one really knew. I said, After talking to a bunch of people and what they're doing, it looks like advertising is going to pay, which luckily I was right about, but it could very easily have said it will be something else and been wrong about that. Um, so yes, it's a fascinating thing because you're always out there researching things that nobody knows the answer to. And then this is important from a sort of writing perspective. You need to condense that down into extremely clear and pithy research reports that people are willing to pay thousands of dollars for. And that meant there was a real focus on getting the writing to be as powerful and clear and perceptive and insightful as possible. So I'd really say that that was the crucible that I was my my sort of best writing was born in. And if you look at the Writing Without Bullshit book, if I'm honest, most of the principles in there are things that I learned while I was at Forrester. Now it's always fun, if you're the analyst that's the expert on television, yeah, you get quoted in the press all the time, and that's sort of enjoyable. But there's also a lot of traveling around, talking to people in companies that need advice, and then having them tell you you're wrong and you're crazy. Uh,
Did you miss it when you left?
it's an interesting question. Um, In the in the last few years there, I was working on, some specific things about research quality, which in the end were contrary to the directions that the company was going. So it was sort of clear that we were out of step with each other. Um, what I miss most is the colleagues. I was in an environment full of really smart people who were really interesting to talk to, and then I was out on my own, as a, a sole practitioner. And I sort of get some of that from working with these authors. I mean, I worked with some very smart authors, but, it was enjoyable to be in that crucible of thinking. It is also now quite enjoyable to not have to be traveling 75% of my life, so I'll take that.
Yeah, it's funny though. I hadn't actually planned on asking you that question, but the reason I did was you reminded me not for nearly as long in my career, but I was an investment banker in a former incarnation working on mergers and acquisitions that could sometimes be in the B's. And when I remember when I decided to leave, my sort of team leader was like, the thing is, if I left, the thing I'd miss the most is being around such really smart, kind of high achieving people. And I was like, I had this very chauvinistic thought in my head. I have tons of smart friends. I won't miss this. And I did miss being around teams of just like really, really smart people working on really hard problems that can just come out of nowhere. I mean, a lot of that was grinding as well, but like this really high level kind of problems and being around people who can handle those kinds of things and trust you to work at a high level as well was something that I really missed. Actually, just one last question about your past, I suppose, and that I also hadn't planned on asking. I have a little pet kind of concept of the myth of incompatible talents, which is that if you're good at math, people think you must be bad at art. And if you're good at art, people think you must be bad at math. And there's various incarnations of that. Um, do you think that being good at math and being good at writing are things that are connected in your skill set?
Um, yes, in the way that I look at it, they're very closely connected. So, uh, these are some things that they have in common. First of all, if you're writing nonfiction, then you need logic is really important, and so is evidence. And in mathematics, at least at the higher levels, it's about proving things, which requires some very rigid logic. And so that kind of reasoning turned out to be really useful as an analyst, and it continues to be useful to me as I write nonfiction books and help people with nonfiction books. The other thing is that math is problem solving. We may remember this where we're like, find the value of X or, oh, well, what method will allow me to calculate this integral? And I think of writing also as problem solving. How am I going to keep people interested? Okay, I just wrote 3 paragraphs on this. Now I need to pivot. How can I retain people's attention? How can I convince somebody that this thing I'm about to say is true? What can I bring to bear there? And the problem solving of writing to me is not completely divorced from the kind of problem solving I did when I was doing math. And I will tell you this, that if you can write, there's room for you in this world. Forget AI, we still need writers. And if you can do problem solving, there's room for you. But if you can do both of those things, then you're gonna have a great career.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you wrote a blog post recently about someone suggesting that, because we have AI, we're not going to have to teach people how to write anymore or something like that, which if you, I would say just, really understand what writing is, that's just a
Well,
nonsense
that's like
concept.
saying, "We have microwave ovens, so no one has to cook anymore."
Yeah.
And it's a pretty bland way to live your life.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, yeah, no, that's really good. I have a sort of personal observation. I've never really understood what mathematicians did until a friend of mine who was doing a doctorate I was doing an English doctorate. He was doing math, and one day he was like sort of had his backpack and his coat on, and I was like, "Oh, where are you going?" And he's going, "I'm going to the zoo in Edinburgh." And I said, "What for?" He said, "The penguin eggs won't hatch," and they needed a mathematician to tackle that problem. He was in fluid dynamics or something like that. But I was like, oh wow, that is that ever an incredible kind of like that's way more interesting than my trip to the library to read some Coleridge today. Um, uh, okay, so just moving on to this new study, the Business Book ROI Study. I was wondering if you could just sort of set the stage for us a little bit, tell us the origins of the origin story of the study.
Yeah, so, the study actually was conceived by, 2 people, the CEO of Gotham Ghostwriters, Dan Gerstein, and the CEO and founder of Amplify, a hybrid publisher, Naren Ariel, both really smart and interesting people, and they realized that we really needed to get some data about what business books were about, and more importantly, about how business authors actually make money because, there's this idea that you make money in ways other than just selling books. So let's see if we can prove it. So they got together with 2 other sponsors, the people at Smith Publicity and at Thought Leadership Leverage, and they hired me to help design this study and to help get it out to as many business authors as we could. So between April and August of 2024, we did as much outreach as possible. We ended up reaching 350 authors, of which 300, more than 300 had been published already. Um, and this survey went into great detail on who are you, what were you trying to accomplish, how long did it take, what kind of things did you pay for along the way, and how did you make money, and from what things did you make money. So the results of that survey were translated into a research report, which I wrote using my experience at Forrester. That was not very hard. And we published that, and that's actually a free download that people can get at authorroi.com right now. So we've been talking about it since then, and there were some pretty interesting results that came out. And with 300 authors, which I think is the most comprehensive study of business authors, business authors that's ever been done, we have enough data to actually draw some pretty interesting conclusions.
Yeah, that reminds me, in when the probably over email interview that Jane Friedman did with you for the
Mm.
hot sheet, the first result that she pointed out was she couldn't believe so many authors were actually happy with their experience writing a book. I think it was like 89% said they were overall happy with the whole experience. I mean, maybe let's start there. What were they happy with when they were answering the survey? What did they say?
Okay. So remember, these are business book authors. So I think if you asked authors of romance novels, um, you wouldn't necessarily get the same answer. And Jane Friedman serves all authors, not just business book authors. But yes, we found this that 89% of people said that they were happy. Most of them said they were very happy with having written a book. And what I can tell you, both from this study and from working with many authors, is that business authors who are serious anyway come at this with a pretty clear idea of what they want. They want to boost their reputations. They want to get an idea out in the world, and they want to get more public speaking, get more consulting, get more leads, do things that actually lead to direct revenue. And 64% of the authors in our survey said that their book process was profitable. That is, if they looked at the total amount of increase in revenue that they got and subtracted the money that they spent, it ended up on the positive side of the ledger. And I think that will tell you a lot about why people are so happy with this, is because they set out with a goal and they accomplish that goal.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned, the sort of money they spent as well. You already brought up a sort of technical term that people not familiar with the book publishing industry might not know, which is hybrid. And the three sort of methods for publishing that I believe your authors engaged in are traditional, hybrid, and self-publishing. Whereas in this case, traditional is, you get an agent, maybe you write a book kind of proposal. The agent shops it around to a traditional book publisher, and the book publisher bids for it if you get lucky. Maybe you get a bit in advance and things like that. And then self-publishing is, YOLO to some extent, but like, just go out there, like create a book and get it on various platforms yourself. And then hybrid is actually in this context, hybrid refers to hiring or paying a company or consultants or what have you to help you with the book publishing process, if I understand the three distinctions correctly.
Right. Yeah. It's really important for people to understand the difference between hybrid publishing and self-publishing. So there was always this term of vanity publishing around there. It's like, you pay somebody to publish your book. Um, but there's a lot more to it in hybrid. A hybrid publisher behaves a lot like a traditional publisher. They have similar distribution channels. They have a similar production process. They actually pay higher royalties per book, although they don't pay in advance. Um, and they can be selective. They're not just going to take any book that people come along, because they're going to put a significant amount of effort into it. But yes, you're right. The economics are different in that people pay the hybrid publisher and then see whether it works out. And what our study showed was that more than half the time, for people who had hybrid publishers, they were able to show a profit despite the cost of the hybrid publisher.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, discourse, I guess, like hybrid, vanity, things like that.
Mm.
And for people not familiar with it, the term vanity press was a kind of old pejorative, was meant to refer to people who thought that being a published author kind of elevated you in some kind of social hierarchy, basically. And if they couldn't get that elevation from a traditional publisher, they would pay something that call itself a publishing company to publish their book, and they would buy their social elevation that way. The hybrid publishers that we're talking about are businesses for whom the author is their customer, as you've pointed out in a couple of podcasts I listened to preparing for this interview. You're the customer. With a traditional publisher, you're not the customer. The bookstore is the customer, or whoever's selling the books is the customer. But with a hybrid publisher, you, the author, are the customer. So it might, and like you pay them, but you're paying them for a service, and it's a very clear-eyed service, which is they ask you, what are your goals? Let's talk about how we can achieve them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the easiest way to help people to understand this is if you go into an airport bookstore and you look at the books on that they're featuring, probably a third to a half of them are hybrid published books. Um, so uh, these authors, you pick it up, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. And these companies like Amplify that sponsored the study, as well as Idea Press, Greenleaf, Page Two, those are some of the more reputable ones that I've worked with. They do a solid job, and then these authors use these books to basically establish themselves and their reputations. Um, the traditional publishers will have better distribution, for example, ability to get it into more bookstores or get it into international distribution. But one of the main differences is that hybrid publishers can typically get a book out in 6 to 9 months. And a traditional publisher, you're more likely to have to wait 15 to 18 months. And for business book authors, waiting 18 months to get the impact from having written a book is not really usually what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I believe partly, I mean, in your experiences taught you, I think there might be three things, but one of them about that are sort of key for like, should I go forward with a book, a business book idea and write the book? And one of them is newness. And so timing is actually really, really important. And being subject to an 18-month or 2-year, production process with a traditional publisher just doesn't really fit if that's what you're up to.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, if you look at the 2 books that I wrote most recently, Writing Without Bullshit was published by HarperCollins, a traditional publisher. It is an evergreen idea. That book is every bit as relevant now as it was when it came out in 2016. Um, so it didn't really make a whole lot of difference to me whether it came out 6 months later or 6 months earlier. But Build a Better Business book, my most recent book, that generates work for me. People say, "Can I hire you as a ghostwriter? Can I hire you as an editor?" And I I didn't really wanna wait 6 or 9 extra months to get that business. Plus, the traditional publisher looks at that and says, we don't think that's gonna sell well enough." Whereas from my perspective, it sells 1,000 copies and 10% of those people contact me and ask me for help. I'm doing great. So, it's a very different kind of perspective on publishing.
Yeah, and one of the I'm looking at the author motivations page in the and methods in the report right now.
Uh,
And as you're talking about, when it comes to particularly to publishing business books, generating leads and speaking engagements and getting new clients and stuff like that. If you offer consulting services, it's often way more of a goal than book sales revenue for the authors of the books.
yeah, it's interesting. I decided to do a little bit of additional analysis on the data, just this week because I thought, okay, one of the takeaways from this report is that business authors make a lot more money from things not associated with book sales, that is, things like consulting and speaking, than they do from royalties and advances and rights payments and things of that kind. So I said, all right, I have the data. What's the answer to that? And it turns out that if you look at all of the authors in our survey, the average percentage of their revenue that comes from sources other than directly from the book is 41%. Is not that great. But if you look at people who made at least $10,000 in revenue, then it goes up to 63%. And if you look at people who made at least $25,000 in revenue, it goes up to 69%. So among people who are sort of serious about this, they know that the money that comes directly from the book is a much smaller proportion of what matters to them than the money that comes from the sort of knock-on effects of having published the book.
It's interesting you make that point about people who are serious about it. And I think at one point, maybe it was in the Jane Friedman interview, but you were asked, like there's this correlation between, going with a hybrid publishing process and getting increased return on investment from what you've done. And I think part of the point you make is that, yeah, someone who's that committed, that they're going to like spend money and hire a company to help them with their project or consultants is probably more kind of bought into doing all the work around like that outside the writing that goes into making a book successful and whatever your motivations are.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw, for example, that there's a significant correlation between people who spent money on public relations for the book launch and and profit. Now, that doesn't mean that if you pay a PR firm that your book will be profitable, but it does mean that people who are serious about the book and they're investing in things like public relations, they're much more likely to see success. And the same was true for people who hired ghostwriters. We had the same sort of correlation for people who had a clear revenue strategy going in. It was visible to me here that while there were 300 authors in this survey, there was a percentage of them that basically said, we're doing this in a very deliberate way, and they were much more likely to succeed.
Yeah, and one of those measures of success is very hard to measure, but you can ask people their perception of what effect it's had on them, and one of them is credibility to prospects and clients, which is just so important that if you can point even if they don't read it or ever buy a copy or get a copy as a gift from you or something like that, if you can point to a book a good book that you've published, that this can really help increase your credibility to prospects and clients if you're self-employed or in consulting and stuff like that.
Yeah. By the way, I've been looking off to the side because I'm just getting the right statistics here.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, 68% of the authors said that they had increased their credibility to prospects and clients. 61% saw an increase in the value of their personal brand. Um, 59% said that they got more podcast interview requests. So I guess this is what's happening with you and me. So, so yes, there were all these soft benefits that go well beyond what happens with the money. And in fact, there was a significant number of people uh, in our survey that said they got zero revenues. It was like 17% of the people, but they were also the same people who said, no, we didn't set out to make money. We set out to generate influence. And they had that kind of sort of soft success as opposed to just getting dollars and cents from people hiring them to be consultants.
It's interesting too. One of the big motivations that you cite that people report their motivation, like reported motivations, is sharing knowledge. And I asked you that question before, but why is it so high? Such a high percentage of people who say they're glad they wrote a business book. And one of the things is that they actually put their thoughts together about their field or their specialty, or their thoughts about how things work, how to succeed in their business and things like that. Just putting those thoughts together in one place, even just for you, can have really great value. And I imagine that the practical like value of that is that, like, if when the subject comes up, you've got lots to say and it's coherent and persuasive.
Yeah, I'd say having worked with many authors, there's two things that are almost always true. One is when they get to the end of the process, they say, man, that was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. Because the process of assembling all of your thoughts and making sure that there's no errors in there and that it's comprehensive and that you have all of the sources noted and that you've published it in a way that people are impressed with. Yes, that's a lot of work. The second thing is they say this was absolutely worth it, and I think it is not just because they can say, "Oh, here's this book with my name on the cover," but it's because going through all of that effort to produce a book has basically crystallized the idea in their mind in a way that enables them to have a high degree of influence and visibility.
And an important dimension of all that work on the book is doing research around the project. Uh, for example, what should the title be? Really, if I've got 10 ideas, which one should I pick? Things like that. Uh, did authors report going about doing that research? Did they have to be informed when they sort of maybe hired a consultant or something like that? Yeah, you actually should Google that title idea to see if it's already out there. Things like that. What are the kinds of research that authors that you know maybe should think about doing, either independently or paying someone to do, when they're thinking about writing and publishing a business book?
So the kind of research you're talking about is research that really should go on before you make the decision to write a book. And when I talk to authors, there's basically four questions that they need to answer that are going to determine whether it's worth writing this book. The first question is, who is your audience? And the right answer is not everybody. It's something like, people who program in C++ or project managers in manufacturing or digital marketers or something like that. The second question is, what's this person's problem? The third question is, what's your solution to their problem? Because your book really should help solve their problem. But the fourth question is, how is this book different from what else is already out there? And unless you want to just get swallowed up in the sea of all of the other books, your book has to be the first book that tells the inside story of what happened at Facebook, or the first book that uh, tells you how to use AI to improve your writing ability, or the first book that that combines you know, celebrity influencers and uh, social media. I'm making this stuff up, but the point is that unless you have done the research to see what else is out there, you don't know whether your book is worth writing, and you don't really want to write a book that's already in existence. And it's true, when I work with authors, it's funny, I'm like, "I'm gonna help you come up with a title." Well, how do you do that? The way I do that is we engage in a conversation in which I behave like a very stupid person, saying, "What's your book about?" I don't really get that. Can you explain that another way?" No, I'm still not getting it. And it gets them all riled up, and then eventually I listen and words come out. I'm like, "Oh, I never heard those words together before." Then the next step is to go on the universal search engine for book titles, which is called Amazon.com. And you check and make sure that there's not another book on the same topic with the same title. And if you have that unique combination of words that both reflects what the book is about and hasn't been used before, then you're in a good position to have a title that will stand out.
Yeah, I look kind of, I don't know how deep this question is about the sort of history of book publishing in the
Yeah.
book industry, but, I sort of got into that world in around 2011 or 2012. And I remember the first and only big book publishing convention I went to was in New York in 2013, or 2014. And, I remember, Guy Kawasaki getting up and saying, the last meeting I had with a publishing company, they asked me what I was going to do to promote my book with my 1 million followers on Twitter. And I said, I'm here to ask you what you're going to do for me. And that was the last meeting he ever had with a conventional book publisher, at least at the time, as I recall the way he told the story. And if you follow, let's say, Jane Friedman, how to write books these days, stuff like that. She'll tell you one thing you need to do if you're going to go the conventional route. You are going to have to write a business plan for your book. You're going to have to show what are contemporary titles in that field that have succeeded. What are their author profiles like? Do they have lots of followers on this platform or that platform and stuff like that? I guess my question for you is, does that represent a shift? Or was it always the case that a conventionally published author was going to be expected to have to do a lot of work promoting their book, and very little was going to be provided from the publisher themselves?
It does represent a shift, but it's not new. That's really been part of the process for at least 15 years now, possibly more. Um, and uh, so I happen to be working with authors on 3 different book proposals right now. And what I can tell you is that an okay book with a fantastic marketing plan will probably get picked up by a publisher, and a fantastic book with a lame marketing plan will not. It is that important. So, if you're interested in traditional publishing, you really need to go about this. And um, there's one publisher, Wiley, that actually says, "All right, show us your plan for how you're going to sell 10 to 20,000 books." And you may not hear those exact words from other publishers, but they're thinking something similar. So, yeah, this is part of the reason why people are interested in hybrid publishing and self-publishing, is because they look at that and they say, "I do all that work, and the only thing I get from you is an advance. Why don't I do it myself?" And if you have a lot of faith in your ability to sell your own books, then you're better off going with a hybrid publisher or self-publishing, because you'll get a lot more money per book.
Just before we maybe move on to the last part of the interview, where we hopefully talk about really interesting things going on in the book publishing industry, um, I've been sort of setting this up in our email exchange when I invited you to be on the podcast. You asked me sort of what's Leanpub, and I was like, oh, if we're known for one, we're a self-publishing platform. If we're known for one thing, it's for promoting the lean publishing process. And you replied saying, that doesn't sound like the kind of thing that I would recommend to authors. So I thought let's have our discussion, if you're up for it. The sort of origin story of Leanpub is, there's two sort of facets to it. The first is my co-founder Peter wrote a book on, basically a programming book, and within some short period of time, like a day or a week after it came out, something about the programming language changed. I'm getting the details wrong, but it was something like that, which made much of his book, especially code samples, where one character off, the code doesn't run. it made his book obsolete right after it came out. So the idea of like writing a book, that can be easily updated was kind of part of the idea there. And the other thing is that Leanpub started originally as a kind of blog to book service, and our first customer was why am I blanking on his name? The author of the Lean Startup,
Very right, yes.
Eric Ries. I can't believe I blanked on that. And his blog was called Startup Lessons Learned, and he published that on Leanpub. But then he went on to do the Lean Startup, and so that's kind of where those ideas were already percolating around him at the time. But the idea was that one approach to publishing a book could be get the first couple chapters out there. Try to start getting during a period where you might be just writing in secret and you're sort of adding content. You can actually build an audience and you can get feedback from them while you're writing. And basically, so this is where the kind of lean startup thing comes in, sort of go out, talk to customers and iterate on what you're doing. And you might even be like, one of our sort of success stories is instead of spending 2 years writing a book, publishing it and getting no audience, publish the first 3 chapters, see if anyone cares. And if no one does, maybe you just stop that project and move on to something else. So but there is this, as I was saying earlier, especially for us, there is this kind of YOLO element to it, right? Like just, you've got an idea for a book, a business book, say, based on maybe your experience with this or that. One process that we try to facilitate is just get your first couple chapters out there and see what happens. Does that sound like a good approach to you for some projects or for none?
No, I did exactly what you just described, and I used a platform not called Leanpub, it's called Bernoff.com. I published what basically were chapters in my book on my blog, and one of them got more than 1 million views. It was called uh, 10 Top Writing Tips and the reasoning behind them. And it got circulated widely, and I'm like, this is great. Now I know that the people like this, but this is, I didn't need a publishing service to do that. Um, that blog is now up to in excess of 3 million views, not just that one post, but the whole blog, basically because I'm always trying ideas out there. And yeah, I can see that sort of having a fragment of a book and publishing it, you could do that. But the authors that I'm working with don't look at things that way. They want they they are not sending up flyers to see what people are interested in. They already know what people are interested in because they're out in the market and people are saying, I need your help with this, or, nobody ever told me this thing that you just told me. You should really write about that because everyone needs to know about that. Um, I mean, here's a little bit of math for you. In the survey that we did, we said, how much revenue did your book generate total? The self-published books was $8,000 median. The hybrid published was $35,000. The traditionally published was $67,000. And in terms of profit, self-published $1,700 median, hybrid $4,500, traditional $52,000. So this is really a sign, I think, that yeah, I know a lot of authors that are self-publishing, and good for them, but they're doing small efforts and getting small returns. And in a lot of cases, they're profitable, but the profits aren't that large. Whereas the people who are doing hybrid publishing and traditional publishing are putting in more effort and are likely to get much bigger returns.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, backed up by numbers. And I really appreciate it, particularly if I would venture to say, if people are particularly interested in their public profile and things like that, coming out with a full product with a PR launch that's researched and sort of has a targeted market and things like that is probably more appropriate than just sort of throwing something out there and calling it a book, or something like that.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of these questions about agile versus waterfall and software development, right? So when I work with authors, it would be similar to what you'd call a waterfall process. And
Mhm.
We do a careful plan. We write things down. Sometimes we make adjustments along the way, but we know where we're going and we know how we get there, and we can sort of see how we're doing. But I know there are people who are like, they write things, they put them up, they see what the reaction is. People want more of this, we'll put some more of that up there. Oh, okay, we'll try this. Oh, they hated that. We're not going to do that. Sort of like an agile development process for writing. And um, if you want to write a book, that's fine, but don't come to me because I don't want to be have anything to do with that sort of chaos when it comes to writing.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting you say that because like a lot of the sort of most successful authors on Leanpub are people who are like, oh, I can write in an agile way. And guess where they come from? They come from agile manufacturing. They come from agile programming. That's why, so many Leanpub books are technology book. It's because people see the process and they're like, oh, that's the way I want to do it. One of a couple of the signatories to the Agile Manifesto have written books on Leanpub and published books on Leanpub. Why? Because they're totally, oh yeah, I get that. The people around me get that and things like that. When it comes to money as well, when it comes to, I could point to data and stuff like that, but we're currently such a special case in the sense that so many of our books are technology books. So many of our books are, books by people who are already successful kind of in sort of niche areas of technology and stuff like that. And so their customers are people who might even have corporate budgets to spend on their books. Their customers are people who like, I'm going to be able to bill myself out $100 an hour higher if I can actually master what's in this book, things like that. So they're willing to pay a lot more for ebooks, and sort of than customers of, I mean, particularly you brought up the sort of poor suffering romance authors, things like that, where it's like, oh no, I better get out my 100,000 word book every month, to sort of keep things up. I mean, so for example, one of our best-selling books by revenue of all time is worth $300, because it's for a very niche Cisco certification, kind of thing. So like, so that's one reason, like, so I would say for our authors, it's sort of like it's just, there's something about the way our platform works that sort of, it works for certain kinds of things. But I can tell you, we haven't had anyone successful making money with like a novel on Leanpub, for example, which is most people do when they think of books.
That's the first 3 chapters of the novel aren't worth much all by themselves. It's funny when I meet people socially, they say, "Well, what do you do?" I say, "I'm an author." They say, "Do you write fiction?" I say, "Not on purpose." So, I know it's a very different way of looking at things.
The funny thing about that, actually, just I now I have to mention it, is one of the reasons you might know this, but this was in a talk my friend of mine gave at an O'Reilly talk and Tools of Change talk in 2013 or something like that, about explaining what the potential value is of publishing books in progress. And one of the reasons those 19th century English novels are so fat is they were published serially. Dickens was a business genius, and he owned the magazine that these things were published in. And like, if by chapter 3 everyone was really interested in Little Dorrit, or I don't think that's actually a particularly long one, but everybody was interested in, what David Copperfield was up to. All of a sudden, the outline for his book got a little bit longer. Um, they were hot, like flying off the shelves to find out what the next step in the adventure is.
Uh, Half of my work as an editor is deleting things, so I've gotten along with Dickens. Alright, so let's move on. What else do you wanna know?
So yeah, so I just thought in the last part of the interview, we might talk about some things that are going on in the book publishing industry right now. Particularly, one of your latest blog posts was about AI. You were at a conference at MIT talking about this. One of the questions I get asked when people find out what I'm doing is like, is the book industry going to die because it's all going to be AI going forward? If someone asked you that question, what would you say?
I'd say, "No, you're crazy," is what I'd say. Look, I just edited a book that, was in large part written with AI, and it was problematic. It was slow and even, there were not very many errors in it, but it also just was not very compelling, and, that's the thing that humans have, and you might think that's about novels. But no, all books, especially business books, have to have stories about people.
Mhm.
They need to have some drama to them. They need to be written in a way that keeps you reading. And if you use AI, you're going to generate this sort of crap. I call it the AI accent. This even thing with the paragraphs that are all the same length, the sentences that
Mhm.
are all the same length, that just lulls you right to sleep. Um, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea. AI is a wonderful tool for authors and writers. If you have to, if you go to ChatGPT and say, well, what are the top 7 ideas that people are talking about right now in Agile? You get some pretty good answers. Plus, now it's like, okay, here's some links. I'll go look at them. And if you, I did this on the most recent book I ghost wrote, or I had some technical papers that I really didn't. So I like, read this paper and tell me what the main idea is in the paper in 150 words. I'm like, oh, okay, that's now I know what that's about, and I can go back into the paper and get the details if I need, or I can say, oh, I don't need to read that. It's not that useful. So, uh, as a tool, AI is excellent, but as a writer, it's boring. And that's the challenge, is that boring writing is not good for anybody. It's not good for the author, and it's really not good for the reader.
One of the big controversies around AI now in the book publishing and in the world of writers is like, let's say you have a line all the way from people who are like, the AI is companies are stealing my work,
Yeah.
to Ian Bogost at The Atlantic, who wrote a great piece saying, what do I care? Basically, in the end, where would you fall?
What a fascinating question. Um, that article that was written in The Atlantic, they had a list of they had this little thing you could query to find out if your books had been used to train these AIs. And I put in my name, and I'm like, crap, this thing is reading my books. They stole my books. That's not great. I don't like that at all. Somebody should be paying me for that. So yes, I believe that training these machines on other people's content without any compensation is not really fair. But I also believe that in the end, there's going to be deals cut that actually will allow that to happen. You may have seen recently that one of the major publishers um, uh, is now offering authors payments to allow their books to be used to train AIs, which they then will charge the AI company for. And I just think, okay, that seems like a much more reasonable thing. And the thing that worries me is that if you poke an AI enough, often it will regurgitate something that's pretty close to verbatim what it read or looked at in the case of images. And that's, sorry, not really appropriate for it to be doing that.
Yeah, it's I think the deal you're talking about too is, I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was $5,000 from Microsoft to the publishing company, and it would be split per title, and it would be split 50-50 between the publisher and the author. Um, and it's interesting. When I read that, I was struck by, it might sound to people like, oh, $2,500 for my book to be eaten up by AI and forever in there being used to generate money somehow doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of traditionally published books don't make $2,500.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a few things about that. First of all, um, that $2,500 is that's from one AI company. So
Right.
presumably in the future, they might be able to sell it to other ones and you get more payments for that. And the other thing is that your book is not that important. Okay. So, so it's interesting. If you go to Chat GPT right now and you say, um, what is, what are the weaknesses of writing in the passive voice? It will go out to thousands of sources, and it will come back and give you an answer. And that answer might be based a little bit on stuff that I've written about it. On the other hand, you can actually go to ChatGPT and say, what does Josh Bernoff think are the problems with writing with passive voice? And then it will actually give you a pretty good summary of what I have written with links that take you to bernoff.com, my blog. So no, I'm not really upset about that. Um, so, I'm this, it- I guess the two ends of the spectrum, though, as I see it, are this is happening, get out of the way, which sorry, I'm not really ready to buy that. And then the other end is, stop, you can't do this. This is, wrong. And I'm like, well, okay, that's not going to work either. So somewhere in between that is a licensing scheme that will compensate people freely for their content. And I think equally important, allow people to opt their content out of being used in this mechanism.
Another really big issue in the world of book publishing these days, particularly in North America, I would say, is social media. And what should authors be doing on social media, particularly with what we're seeing happening with Twitter/X? For anyone listening at the time capsule, or who is just not aware, there's a sort of big talking point in, the news these days that a lot of people are leaving X for Blue Sky. And, for a long time now, it's been the case that, people were like convinced that you needed to be on Twitter and you needed to be trying to get a big Twitter following. I believe you were very early on with Twitter, and you wrote about it in your book with your co-author and things like that. What's your current view on the value of authors trying to build an audience on X?
Don't. So, so yes, Groundswell, the book that I wrote with Charlene Leo on social media that came out in 2008, we said, there's this new thing called Twitter. Maybe you should look at it. It looks really interesting. So I think we were right about that. And yes, because we were early on there, I ended up with 25,000 Twitter followers over time. Um, but even before Elon Musk bought X, or bought Twitter at the time, it was a terrible book promotion platform because it's very hard to get people to click through and look at articles or other things like that on that platform. Um, Other platforms like LinkedIn are far more effective at that. Facebook is more effective at that. Instagram is more effective at that. So uh, it was already poor in terms of yield back then. And since Elon Musk took it over, a whole bunch of people have left that were interesting, which makes it a lot less useful to use it. And a whole bunch of really creepy, awful, disgusting people have come on and started saying creepy, awful, disgusting things. And that's not something you really want to be part of. So, um, and I'm going to actually bring a fact to bear here. In our survey, we asked the authors, what social media platforms did you use to promote your book and how effective were they? The top two things that they used were LinkedIn and their own blogs. And about halfway down the list was Twitter/X. And of all of the things that we asked them about, that was the one that they were least satisfied with. Less than half of the people said that they thought that that was useful. So, don't waste your time there. Really, put your time into other social media platforms, because that is the wrong place to try and accomplish anything.
Just before I let you go, so we've talked about AI in the book publishing world. We've talked about social media. Is there any other big thing that you're thinking about these days uh, in the book world of books?
Is there any other thing? I I guess I I'm very interested in what's going to happen with Amazon,
Mm.
right? Because of the antitrust scrutiny. And Amazon has not proven to be a really good partner for authors or for publishers. And they've just sort of stuck with it, which is what happens with monopolies. So I would really be interested in whether it's possible to find ways around that monopoly. And for anyone who's interested, when I publish and write about books, I always include links to bookshop.org, which ships a little slower, won't necessarily give you the best price, but is actually more likely to generate revenues for local bookstores. So, yeah, I said Amazon was a universal search engine for book titles, but that doesn't mean that it's the best place for people to sell books.
Yeah, it's interesting. The regulatory situation for Amazon might be changing in a couple months, for a few years at least. So, so we'll see whether
Well, well, you might be surprised, mm, that this sort of enmity towards big tech is actually cuts across parties. Um, I I am a liberal, and, I read Josh Hawley's book, which is a book about big tech, sort of against big techs. That's Senator Hawley, and he's the really very, uh, right-wing conservative. And I thought, "Okay, you know what? You and Elizabeth Warren could probably say pretty much the same thing here because you may have gotten to that conclusion from different places, but you both think that big tech is not really good for America being a monopoly. So it might be surprising now with the influence of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, maybe that will shift. But I think that assuming that Republicans are going to take the side of big tech is probably a mistake.
Yeah, that's a very excellent point that things are more complicated than they can sometimes seem from a certain perspective. If you're like listening to the things that people on the right are saying about Lena Khan, for example, you might come to obvious conclusions right away about what's going to happen to Amazon. But then, Amazon might be like not so worried about sort of competition issues and more worried about labor and even willing to trade, one side for the other. So it is a lot more complicated than it can sometimes seem. Well, Josh Burroff, thank you very much for being on the podcast today and talking about your background and career and the business book ROI study, which people can find at authorroi.com. And I definitely recommend your blog as well to people who are interested just in, sort of ideas and books and things like that.
Okay, thanks for having me on. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Thanks.